What is up, my language learning masters? And welcome to Natural Languages, and specifically to the Language Input Podcast. And today I'm back with a new solo episode in which, as usual, I'm just gonna answer, questions that I get from subscribers, from followers, but also questions that I read in different social media platforms and forums and so on around the language learning or language acquisition process. Different types of questions that people ask themselves, and to sort of help you understand how the process actually works, to help you understand that we cannot learn any language when you're in the process. And I've talked about it multiple times, but I'll continue to do so because I truly believe in it. All right. And with that being said, let me tell you the topic of today's episode. Let me tell you the question, and right after the intro, we'll get into the episode. So the question is how to learn quote unquote less popular languages. Okay. So yeah, let's get right into the intro and let's start the episode. All right. So that's the question: how to learn quote unquote less popular languages. Because again, if you want to learn English or French or Spanish, some of the most popular languages around the world, it's always going to be easier for you to find resources, to find people to find teachers as well. And yeah, I thought it was an interesting question because, if you're interested in learning languages that are not so popular, that it's a little bit hard to find content on, I thought it was interesting to talk about this, to talk about how I would go about it, because I'm focusing mostly on European languages right now as a language student myself. And for the most part, it's relatively easy to find content for those languages. Especially German and Russian that I'm focusing on right now. I don't have any issues with it, but if you're trying to learn other less popular languages, it might be a struggle to find the content or people who are willing to help you with it, or language teachers even, right? And to get things started, I'd say that the first thing I do is I'll check and see if there's any projects on that specific language already. Because, just to give you an example, there's some YouTube channels on learning Norwegian, for example. Or there's, my friend Brian from South Africa, he teaches Zulu on his YouTube channel. So, those probably fit the definition of a less popular language. And, you might be interested in learning those languages. I might think you're not going to find resources for it, but there are indeed resources for those languages. So the first thing I do is just do some research on YouTube or online on whether there's any project focused on that specific language that you want to learn, because you might be surprised and find some content on it, some project that's based on that specific language. So that's the first thing I'll do. After that, if I'm unable to find any project on the quote unquote less popular language that I want to learn, I'd try to find a language teacher for that language as well. But obviously, when I'm talking about finding resources or content for that language, and now about finding a language teacher for that specific language, you're probably going to find resources and language teachers that focus on the traditional grammar approach. Those are easier to find. But as you can probably expect, you don't want to do that, right? That's what I'm going to tell you. You don't want to do that because that's just not the way the language mechanism works. Okay, and if you haven't listened to it, here on my podcast, I have specific episodes on the topic, on why learning grammar is not necessary, or even why I think that not only is it not necessary, but it might actually be kind of productive as well. But like I said, you have those specific episodes on my podcast, so go check them out if you're interested in the topic. But to sum things up here, I'm going to talk about content, resources, and language teachers that use comprehensible input, right? That focus on the message, on the topic itself, because that's the way it works. That's the way the language mechanism works. Comprehensible input is the key to the entire process, and we learn the language by listening and reading, and speaking and writing. So our output will eventually show up later on as a consequence, right? So that's really important to understand. But like I said, you have specific episodes on these topics, so I just wanted to mention that because it's really important. So back to the episode. So right after trying to find YouTube channels or things like that for the specific language that you want to learn, if you can't, I try to find language teachers, somehow, because sometimes there are like school language teachers that, or even language teachers for adults who are teaching their native language, the quote-unquote less popular language that you want to learn in this case, but they just haven't started the project, or they're not creating content for YouTube or videos and things like that, right? So you just might reach out to them and ask them if they're interested in teaching the language, right? To adults online, or whatever the setting. But those are the two things that I do first. Look for content, look for projects around the language, and even language teacher who, even though they might not be creating content for the language yet, they might be interested in teaching you the language. So those are the first two things I do. And even if it's still, you can find any project or any teacher who uses comprehensible input for the language that you want to learn, and you find it complicated, because again, when you're dealing with less popular languages, for the most part, they're probably not related to your language, to your native language, or to the languages that you already speak. Because, in my personal case, I'm a native Spanish speaker, so the language that I already speak, being Italian, Portuguese, French, English, those are popular languages and somewhat related languages to my own native language, right? So even if I wouldn't be able to find resources on those languages, which I am, because they're popular, but even if I wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to find specific resources for language students because of the similarities between languages. I might be able to get away with just watching cartoons and reading comic books, like really simple things that are not really meant for language students, but are simple enough for me to understand. But if you want to learn, I don't know, Zulu, the example that I just talked about with my friend Brian, if you're starting from scratch, even the most simple resource is not going to be comprehensible. So that's not going to help. Again, comprehensible input is the key to the entire process. So we always have to keep that in mind. So the quote-unquote problem is, if you're starting from scratch with a less popular language, you're going to need help from someone, from a teacher, from a project that creates specific videos for students, right? So like I said, those are the two things I do first, and even if you can't find anything or anybody, I was thinking about it, and the next thing you can do is actually try to find or get in contact with someone from that country. In this example, I'll use Zulu as the example for the whole episode. Let's imagine that there's no project for it, right? So what I do is I reach out to native Zulu speakers from South Africa, right? And try to work out any sort of language exchange, right? Or any sort of setting that works for you, right? Like language exchange, or tell them to teach the language, whatever it is. But first of all, you sort of educate them on comprehensible input and how the language acquisition process works, because we adults, we're all used to the traditional grammar approach. So if you tell someone to help you learn their language, the first thing they're going to think about is, so here's the grammar, here's the vocabulary and things like that. So, and again, that's not going to help you. So you probably need to do some convincing work, right? But I think once you explain to them, like, this is the way it works, this is the way it's always worked, the way it will always work, that's the way we all acquire a native language. And again, you can even refer them to my podcast, or even send them to me. I'll be more than happy to tell them about comprehensible input theories and language acquisition theories, and try to help them, or try to train them in language teaching even, right? Because once you have someone from that country that is going to help you and that is convinced by, I was going to say, this idea of language teaching, but it's not an idea of a theory that we're just coming up with. It's just the way we all acquire a native language, the way the language mechanism works, okay? So once that's done, you can meet regularly, or as often as you'd like with that person, and whatever the setting, like I said, whether that's language exchange or just pure teaching, you can start out with simple things as just describing pictures, right? You just get on a Zoom call, and when it's his or her turn, he or she is gonna just put up a picture and tell you what there is in the picture. It's here there's a man or a woman. Here there's an animal. What animal is this? Is this a dog? It's a dog. And the dog is red. And just the most simple things that you can think of. If you're working out a language exchange setting, same thing for you as the language teacher of the other person. Again, if you're a native English speaker, for example, or a native French speaker or Spanish speaker, and the other person is interested in learning your language, it's probably going to be easier for you as a teacher to teach them your language. So you don't even need to go as simple as describing pictures, like I said. You can even create stories and talk about more complex topics. But when it comes to what's going to help you learn the language, that the quote-unquote less popular language that you want to learn, is those little things that I talked about. Once you reach out to someone, you tell them about comprehensible input and so on, you can work out that idea that I just mentioned, just describing pictures or really simple things like that. And, that's going to give you the basics. You're going to start getting exposed to the language in a comprehensible way. And in a way, in a setting that's not forcing you to actually communicate in the language, because that's obviously impossible, It's impossible until we've been exposed for a long time, right? And we're assuming a situation in which you're starting from scratch, so is going to be a non-factor. So having someone walk you through the initial steps with simple activities like describing pictures, like I said, is really going to help you. It's really going to help you get started with exposure to the language. You're going to start understanding the basics, and later on down the road, you're going to have the foundation to be able to understand simple resources like cartoons or comic books, like I said, and you'll get to a point in which you don't really need that second person to help you out, and that you can focus on getting exposed to the language yourself with other resources that you don't need a second person for, right? And again, once you get to that point, here on the podcast, I also have episodes for, specific resources for language beginners and for language intermediates, and so you can find them in the podcast for more ideas. But that's what I do when it comes to learning a quote unquote less popular language, because it's obviously going to be harder to find resources and language teachers for those languages. But there's more and more projects recently, and like I said, even for languages that you wouldn't expect, like the ones I just mentioned, and I'm sure other languages as well. So do some research on it, and if you can find any project, and try with language teachers, and still if you can find anyone who's familiar with comprehensible input and language acquisition theories, or you can find anyone who's willing to actually help you in that regard, again, reach out to someone from those countries, whose native language is the language that you want to learn, and educate them on these theories, like I said, and like I said, refer them to my podcast, and that'd be awesome for me as well. But I'll be more than happy to help them out, so I help you out eventually, right? And even send them to me, like I said, I'll be happy to train people for other languages and to tell them about comprehensible input, about the way the actual language mechanism works, and the way we can learn any language when you're in the process, like I'm always saying. So yeah, that's what I do. And yeah, so that's it for today, and I really hope you enjoyed it, my dear language learning masters. And as usual, any question, any comment on today's episode, any specific questions on language learning that you want me to talk about in a future episode, again, I'll be more than happy to help you out, because I'll keep creating episodes around questions that I get or around questions that I read online, and of course also the language interviews. But any question you may have is more than welcome. You'll be giving me ideas, like I said. I'll be happy to help you out. And yeah, so we all win. And yeah, so thank you again for listening to this episode till the end. I really appreciate it, and hope that was helpful, like I said. And yeah, I'll hear you in the next one. All right. So thank you, my dear language learning master, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.